Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 24th March 2021. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this article on page number 9 is related to India Taiwan relations. And this issue has gained currency in the backdrop of the recent problems between India and China, especially along the borders in the Ladakh region. And it has been argued by various experts that India should leverage its relations with India and Taiwan to counter the increasing Chinese assertion. Now the issue here is that India has till date been following or has officially followed the One China policy or One China principle. And under this One China principle, India officially recognizes Tibet and Taiwan to be part of China. And as such, India till now does not have any diplomatic relations with the Taiwan. However, India's relations with Taiwan have improved continuously, and that is why it has been argued that India should leverage its position with Taiwan in order to check the Chinese assertion towards India. So in this article, we will look at the key arguments in favor of reconsidering India's One China policy or the One China principle. Now, as you can see in this map, this is in the Chinese main territory and this is known as the People's Republic of China. However, Taiwan claims itself to be the Republic of China. So the question then arises, should India move away from its One China policy? So first we will have to understand what is this One China policy and what has been India's stand on this. Now, One China policy is a position which was enforced by the Communist Party of China that presently rules China. Now, between 1945 to 1949, a civil war and a power struggle started in China between the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang Party which was ruling China at that point of time. However, the Communist Party of China under Mao Zedong came out to be winner and it pushed out the ruling Kuomintang Party to the island known as Formosa, which is presently known as Taiwan. And when the Communist Party of China occupied the main Chinese territory, it came up with this policy of One China policy. And under this One China policy, the Communist Party staked claim on a much bigger territory than which was under its control at that time. And this bigger territory included the mainland China besides Tibet and Taiwan. So China occupied Tibet by 1950 and consolidated its military stranglehold on the region throughout the decade. Further, it has been aiming to capture Taiwan since then, but in the face of global opposition, China has not carried out its designs across the Formosa Strait in the South China Sea to capture the Taiwanese territory. Now, as far as India is concerned, India was amongst the first countries to recognize the communist rule in China. And through the 1954 Sino-Indian Trade Agreement, India acknowledged Chinese control of Tibet, and this was when India officially recognized the One China policy. But there was a war between India and China in the 1960s, and after that, India has not clearly stated its stance as far as the One China policy is concerned. However, in 2003, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the president, he signed a joint declaration with his Chinese counterpart, and this declaration recognized that Tibet Autonomous Region is the part of the territory of People's Republic of China. That is, it was reiteration of India's principle of One China policy. So in this background, let us look at how India-Taiwan relations have unfolded in the past. So first thing to be learned here is that India and Taiwan do not have any official diplomatic relations. And India currently only recognizes the People's Republic of China, that is mainland China, and not the Republic of China's claim of being the legitimate government of mainland China, Hong Kong and Macau. Now, although India has been officially supporting the One China policy and does not have any official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, Taiwan views India's rising geopolitical standing as a counterbalance to the People's Republic of China's dominance in the region. Also, as a part of its Look East foreign policy, India has sought to cultivate extensive ties with Taiwan in terms of trade, investment and cultural ties. In this background, the India-Taipei Association was established in Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan, in 1995 to promote non-governmental interactions between India and China. And this is because India does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and accordingly, India is promoting the non-governmental interactions between India and Taiwan. In 2002, both the countries signed the bilateral investment promotion and protection agreement. And as of 2019, the trade between India and Taiwan was booming and is around $7 billion and is also growing at a rate of 20% year on year. Major Taiwanese exports to India include the integrated circuits, machinery, and other electronic products. And India is also keen to attract the Taiwanese investment, particularly in high technology and labor intensive industries. And more than 80 Taiwanese companies and entities currently have a presence in India. So, this gives us a brief idea of how India Taiwan relations have unfolded and what is the current situation of the India Taiwan relations. Now, although India does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, it has been changing its stance on the One China policy. And this was clearly seen in May 2020 when two members of the Indian Parliament virtually attended the newly elected President Tsai's swearing in ceremony and had praised Taiwanese democracy. And this was seen as a warning message to China and signaled a strengthening of relations between India and Taiwan. In July 2020, the Indian government appointed a top career diplomat, Joint Secretary Gurung Lal Das, the former head of the US division in India's Ministry of External Affairs, as its new envoy to Taiwan. Another issue came up in October. On 10th October, the Taiwanese National Day is celebrated. And ahead of this Taiwanese National Day, the Chinese embassy in India had penned a letter to Indian media houses asking them to adhere to the Indian government's One China policy. And this was because earlier an advertisement in Indian print media carried an image of the Taiwanese president with the slogan that Taiwan and India are natural partners. And this had irked the Chinese government, and accordingly it clarified in this particular statement. Now, the response of India was that the External Affairs Ministry brushed away the Chinese criticism by simply saying that Indian media is free to carry out what they want. And the significant thing here was that the Ministry of External Affairs did not reiterate India's One China policy. So, this was a clear indication that India has been changing its stance, and this was clearly visible in the events that unfolded in 2020. So now what are the arguments for reconsidering One China policy? First is that China itself has never followed the One India policy. And back in 2014, the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj had said that although India adheres to the One China policy, but China should also adhere to One India policy. That is, China should also respect India's territorial integrity and should stop staking claim in the Ladakh region and in the Arunachal Pradesh. Now, recently China had announced that it does not accept Ladakh as a union territory and ignored India's objections to construct roads through the disputed Gilgit-Baltistan region. Further, China has been diplomatically censuring India whenever there are visits by Indian leaders or foreign diplomats to Arunachal Pradesh. Also, China has been blocking foreign funding for the developmental projects that are going on in Arunachal Pradesh and claiming Arunachal Pradesh to be a disputed territory. Also, China has supported insurgencies in the northeastern region. And these are the arguments in favor of reconsideration of India's One China policy. That is, India should reconsider its One China policy and also use to its advantage its relations with territories like Taiwan to check the Chinese assertiveness. So these are few points related to One China policy, and they can be used in writing answers related to India-China relations, and especially India's improving relations with Taiwan can be quoted while writing answers related to India-China relations. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 1 reads that India has abstained in the UNHRC vote on Sri Lanka. Now, this issue was continuously in news in the past 1 month, and it was being speculated that what would be India's stance on this vote against Sri Lanka at the UNHRC. So in this discussion, we will look at the key aspects or the different resolutions that have been passed by the UNHRC against Sri Lanka for its war crimes against the LTTE and what was India's stance in the past. So we will look at this issue of Sri Lanka's war against the LTTE and what have been the reactions post the Sri Lankan war against LTTE at the UNHRC and what has been India's stance against this voting at the UNHRC. Now, in this, a key determining factor for India's decision on the UNHRC votes has been its local politics, especially in the state of Tamil Nadu. So, we will also look at that particular aspect. Now, this issue of UNHRC resolution against Sri Lanka was covered in the Focus magazine of March 2021, that is, in the last month's Focus magazine. Now, this issue was in news in the past month because of a report that was released by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for the Human Rights. And this report had warned that Sri Lanka's failure to address human rights violations and war crimes committed in the past had put the country on a dangerous path that could lead to a reoccurrence of the policies and practices that gave rise to the earlier situation, that is, war against the LTTE in 2008. Now, what is the background of these UNHRC resolutions against Sri Lanka? Now, the background or the rise of the LTTE issue in Sri Lanka lies in its demography. Now, majority population of Sri Lanka is of Sinhalese ethnicity. However, there is a minority which is known as the Tamil minority, and it lives in the northern part and in the northeastern part of Sri Lanka. And it is said that there has been historical inter-ethnic imbalances between this Sinhalese majority population and the Tamil minority population. And this is seen as the background for the origin of the LTTE, or Liberation of Tamil Tigers ELEARN. Now, LTTE was formed in 1970s to correct this historical inter-ethnic imbalance that existed in Sri Lanka. And this issue of the LTTE and the issue of Tamils of Sri Lanka has continued since 1970s till late 2010. So the Tamil Tigers in the LTTE had been waging a full-scale war for an independent state of Tamil Eelam in the north and the eastern part of Sri Lanka since 1983. And various negotiations had taken place between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE, however they all had failed. And accordingly, a Norway-mediated peace process had failed in 2006, and this led the Sri Lankan military to launch offensives aimed at recapturing the territories which were controlled by the Tamil Tigers or the LTTEs. Now, during this war by the Sri Lankan military, it was said that there were war crimes, and these were considered as crimes against humanity, and they were committed by the Sri Lankan military as well as the rebel liberation tiger of Tamil Eelam during the Sri Lankan Civil War. Now, these war crimes included attacks on civilians, civilian buildings by both the sides. It led to the executions of combatants, prisoners by both the sides, and also enforced disappearances by the Sri Lankan military and the paramilitary groups that were backed by them. This led to acute shortages of food, medicine, clean water for the civilians who were trapped in the war zone. And accordingly, a United Nations panel in 2011 found that as many as 40,000 Tamil civilians may have been killed in the final months of the civil war. And at the 11th special session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in May 2009, 17 countries attempted to get the UNHRC to investigate war crimes in Sri Lanka. However, this resolution was thwarted because the Sri Lankan government received support from China, Russia, India, and other developing countries. Then the UNHRC instead passed a resolution which was known as S11/1 in 2009. And this resolution commended or appreciated the Sri Lankan government's action and condemned the Tamil Tigers and ignored the allegations of violation of human rights and humanitarian laws by the government forces or the military of Sri Lanka. Then the UNHRC again adopted a resolution named 19/2 on promoting reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka, especially regarding the war crimes that were committed during the Tamil War in Sri Lanka. Further, this resolution that was passed by the UNHRC welcomed the constructive recommendations that were contained in the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, which was a commission of inquiry that was appointed by the Sri Lankan government to look back at the civil war. And this resolution noted with concern that this report by the Sri Lankan government did not adequately address the serious allegations of violation of international law. However, the Sri Lankan government did not comply with the resolution 19/2, and this led to another resolution which was named as 22/1, which was passed in 2013 at the 22nd regular session of the UNHRC. Now, what did this resolution ask? This resolution called on the Sri Lankan government to carry out an independent and credible investigation into the alleged violations during the Sri Lankan Tamil War. However, the response of Sri Lankan government was not very favorable and it ignored the resolution, and as a consequence in March 2014 again a new resolution was passed which was named as 25/1, and this authorized an international investigation into the alleged war crimes during the 2002 to 2009 period in Sri Lanka. Now, in 2015, the Sri Lankan government decided to become a co-sponsor of the resolution, that is, it decided to support the UNHRC's resolution here. And accordingly, the Sri Lankan government supported the resolution 31 of the UNHRC. And this resolution was followed up by two other resolutions that were 34/1 and 40/1. However, Sri Lanka could not meet the deadlines that were set out in the resolution 31, and the Sri Lankan government then set up a commission of inquiry, an office of missing persons, and an office of reparations, and in the final months it fell apart due to tensions between the president and the prime minister of Sri Lanka. So these are some of the resolutions that were passed by the UNHRC against Sri Lanka, and this was the response of Sri Lanka towards these UNHRC resolutions. Initially, it ignored these resolutions because it got support from some countries like China, etc. However, in 2015, Sri Lanka became a co-sponsor of the resolution that was passed by the UNHRC, which was known as the 31 resolution. So this brings us to the new report that has been published by the Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights. Now, this report has warned against accelerating militarization of civilian governmental functions, reversal of important constitutional safeguards, and political obstructions of accountability, exclusionary rhetoric, and intimidation of the civil society, and the use of anti-terrorism laws by Sri Lanka. That is, it has highlighted that Sri Lanka is again getting on the same path on which it had travelled during the Sri Lankan war. Further, it has alleged that the Sri Lankan government has created a parallel military task forces and commissions that encroach on the civilian functions, and it has reversed important institutional checks and balances and has been threatening the democratic gains and the independence of judiciary and other key institutions in the Sri Lanka. So based on this report, a zero draft resolution was tabled by a core group on Sri Lanka at the UNHRC. And this resolution was backed by UK, Germany, Canada, etc. Now, this zero draft resolution talks about encouraging the Sri Lankan government to implement the requirements of the previous 31 resolution, which even the Sri Lankan government had supported. And accordingly, the recent resolution was also tabled at the UNHRC and it has been passed now, but India abstained from voting at this resolution. In this background, let us look at what was India's position at various resolutions that were passed on the Sri Lanka and what were the reasons that were forwarded by India regarding its support or abstention from voting at these resolutions at the Human Rights Council. So between 2009 to 2019, almost 7 resolutions were passed. And in the 2009 and the 2012 and 2013 resolutions, India had supported in favor of the resolution, that is, India had voted against Sri Lanka at these resolutions. However, in 2014, India changed its stance and it abstained from voting at the resolution. In 2015, what happened is that Sri Lanka itself supported the resolution of the UNHRC, and that is why India was not required to vote at this resolution because even the Sri Lankan government itself supported this resolution. So the subsequent resolutions that were passed in 2015, 17 and 19 did not require a vote because it was adopted even by the Sri Lankan government itself. So what were the reasons that India initially supported the resolution at UNHRC and voted against Sri Lanka? So initially, the votes by India in favor of the resolutions and against Sri Lanka were mainly based on local considerations or local politics in the state of Tamil Nadu, owing to the coalition government at the center. And before 2014, we all know that we had a coalition government at the center and in which the state political parties of Tamil Nadu played a key role. And these local parties of Tamil Nadu had been supporting the cause of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka and the cause of LTTE. And that is why they wanted the central government to hold the Sri Lankan government accountable for its war crimes. So on 2013 resolution, India had voted in the favor of resolution and against the Sri Lankan government. And this was mainly because just ahead of the vote, Tamil Nadu's main opposition party, DMK, had withdrawn from the centre's ruling alliance on the grounds that India was not doing enough to alleviate the alleged human rights violations of the Sri Lankan Tamils by the Sri Lankan government in the Tamil War. However, in 2014, we all know that the coalition era at the central government level has ended. And post that, India's stance has not been much influenced by the local politics of the state of Tamil Nadu, but has been influenced by the geopolitical concerns owing to the increasing Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. And as we all know that in 2014, on the resolution 25-1, India abstained from voting on the grounds that the resolution ignored the steps that had been taken by the Sri Lanka at reconciliation. In 2015, India was not required to vote because even the Sri Lankan government itself joined the resolution, which was adopted unanimously without a vote. And at the present resolution, the dilemma that was there in front of Indian government was that Sri Lanka had withdrawn from the resolutions of the UNHRC, and that is why India was required to clearly display its stance at the UNHRC voting. And accordingly, now India has chosen to abstain from voting at the UNHRC resolution, which is the present news article. Now, before this resolution was put to vote, Sri Lanka had officially sought India's help for support against the resolution and supporting the Sri Lankan government. And the Sri Lankan government had described this resolution as an unwanted interference by the powerful countries in the local affairs of Sri Lanka. Now, before this resolution was put to vote, India's permanent representative at the UN had said that this UN report had raised important concerns. However, the permanent representative also talked about the aspirations of the Tamil population and their contribution to Sri Lanka's unity and integrity. That is, India tried to balance its point of view by reiterating its support to the Tamilian population of Sri Lanka and also supporting the Sri Lankan government. And that is why this abstention is being seen positively by both the Sri Lankan government as well as the Tamil population of the Sri Lanka. Further, India had reiterated its commitment to finding a lasting and effective solution for the issue in the Sri Lanka. So India had iterated that India supports Sri Lanka's unity and territorial integrity. And also, India displayed its commitment to the Sri Lankan Tamils' aspiration for equality, justice, peace, and dignity. That is, India is supporting both the Sri Lankan government and its unity and territorial integrity, and also India is supporting the aspiration of the Tamil population, which sees that there is ethnic imbalance between the majority Sinhalese and the local Tamil population, which is in minority in Sri Lanka. And to meet the aspirations of the Tamil population in Sri Lanka, India said that Sri Lanka should take necessary steps through the process of reconciliation, and also the Sri Lankan government should take steps for the full implementation of 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka. And this 13th Amendment provides for certain safeguards and autonomy to the regions in which the Tamils are living. So earlier, India had not taken a call on this issue. However, at this voting, India has abstained from voting at the UNHRC resolution, and that has been praised both by the Sri Lankan government as well as the Tamil community of Sri Lanka. So this was the issue and this was the background, how resolutions were passed at the UNHRC, what was the stand of the Sri Lankan government, and what was the stand of India on all these UNHRC resolutions. And also we have seen the present context of the UNHRC resolution and what was India's stand on this. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 8 has been written in the context of India releasing new rules governing the trade of electricity across its borders. And accordingly, the article is titled as The Surge of Geopolitics in South Asia's Power Trade. So the author argues that India's new trade rules are political and an irritant, and instead India should be planning a stable institutional model. So in this context, let us analyze the key aspects of India's energy diplomacy in furthering its neighborhood first policy, and also the impact of these rules on India's energy trade, especially in the context of Chinese ambitions in India's neighborhood. Some of the points that we discuss here can be important for us from General Studies Paper 2 point of view in the topic International Relations. And first, let us look at what is India's neighborhood policy, how has India's energy diplomacy unfolded, and also what are these new rules and what are some of the concerns related to them. But first, let us look at what is India's neighborhood first policy. So, under its neighborhood first policy, the government is committed to developing friendly and mutually beneficial relations with all its neighbors. It states that India is an active partner or active development partner and is involved in several projects in these countries. And India's policy of neighborhood first focuses on creating mutually beneficial, people oriented regional frameworks for stability and prosperity. And we note that India has been actively engaging in various forums in South Asia and in India's neighborhood. For example, India actively wants the SARC to be functional. Also, India has been playing a key role in the Indian Ocean Regional Association for Regional Cooperation and also in the BIMSTEC and SCO and the ASEAN, etc. So, the government states that our engagement with the countries in the neighborhood is based on consultative, non reciprocal, outcome oriented approach, which focuses on delivering benefits like greater connectivity, improved infrastructure, stronger developmental cooperation in various sectors like security and broader people to people contacts. Now, non reciprocal simply means that India does not expect anything in return and it is only aimed at the integrated regional development. And that is why India is taking part in various infrastructure projects and also believes in stronger developmental cooperation in areas like security and people to people contact. Now, one of the pillars of India's neighborhood first policy has been infrastructure development and various projects in its neighborhood. And in this context comes India's energy diplomacy. Now, the energy sector has been a strong pillar of India's relationship with its neighborhoods in the recent past. And it has signed memorandum of understanding with countries like Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Myanmar in order to improve the power connectivity with these neighboring countries. India already had regional power systems integration with countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal through the high voltage synchronous, that is alternating current, and asynchronous, that is high voltage direct current connections. India has released various rules in the past relating to import and export of electricity, and accordingly it is being said that India can rely on this energy diplomacy to strengthen its relation with its neighbors, even as China is seeking to isolate it among its neighbors. Accordingly, India has recently released the new rules governing trade in electricity across the borders. And these rules define the contours of South Asian electricity market and clearly setting limits on who can buy from and sell into India. So it is said that it will have consequences for the electricity market of the neighboring countries. And further, these rules are an attempt to balance the increasing Chinese presence in the region. So now what are the key concerns regarding these rules that have been released by India for trade in electricity across the border? Let us look at them. So the most important issue here is the rules of ownership. And these rules discourage the participation of plants which are owned by a company and is situated in a third country with whom India shares a land border, however does not have a bilateral agreement on the power sector cooperation with India. So, for example, if a company is located in neighboring country like Bangladesh, with which India shares a border, however, if India does not have a bilateral agreement on power sector cooperation with that country, in that case, India will discourage the participation of that company in the power trade in the region. Now, issue here is that the Chinese companies which were hoping to establish plants in the India's neighborhood in countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh will find a hard time making good on their investments with the Indian market that has been cut off because of these new rules. Further, these rules also place security restrictions on tripartite trade. For example, if a trade has to take place between Bhutan and Bangladesh through the Indian territory, these restrictions will still be applicable. Further, these rules establish elaborate surveillance procedures to detect the changes in the ownership patterns of the entities that are trading with India. So basically, these rules are aimed at countering the Chinese presence in India's neighborhood. And by leveraging its dominant geographical position in the region, India is trying to discourage the presence of Chinese companies in India's neighborhood, and it wants to be the sole and the most important player as far as the electricity market is concerned. Now, India has also imposed stringent restrictions that dissuaded everyone other than Indian and the government entities from participating in the regional electricity market. And this had threatened to undermine the private sector participation itself. To this point, countries in India's neighborhood like Nepal and Bhutan had protested against India. And this led to the new guidelines in 2018 that tried to find a middle ground, and these rules formalized a balancing act and also allowed private sector participation, but they aimed at excluding the Chinese investments in these countries. So the new rules provided for private sector participation, however, they also aimed at excluding the Chinese investments in the region. Now, what is the issue here? So, it is being said that India is trying to exploit its geographical and economic centrality in the region to dictate these rules of electricity trade. And this has egged many of the neighboring countries. So, the author says that such a political approach towards infrastructure and trade projects might be counterproductive for India. And this is because India also aims at increasing its presence in countries or regions like West Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa through global ambitious projects like Global Super Grid, which will be called as One Sun, One World, and One Grid project. And through this project, India wants to increase its presence in terms of the electricity trade in West Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. And if India keeps on following such an approach in its neighborhood itself, such an approach might be counterproductive for India's ambitions through the Global Super Grid project. So, in this background, the author says that the need of the hour is a carefully crafted institutional model to tackle such projects. And such an institutional model can lock countries into pool by setting standards for the investors. That is such an approach of institutional model will be beneficial for India itself, because in that case investors from the neighboring countries will ally with India naturally, and such a model will be rule based and will likely surpass anything that China has to offer. That is, India should become attractive rather than discouraging China in its neighborhood. So if India will have a rule based order and will have a clearly stated institutional model for the investors, it will only attract the investors towards India, and that will surpass anything which China is offering in its neighborhood. So these are few important points here. With this, let's take up the next news article. Now, this article on page number 9 highlights the issue of pendency and delay in the judicial systems of India. And in this line, the author highlights the story of one Vishnu Tiwari, aged 43, who was recently acquitted by the Allahabad High Court in a rape case after spending 20 years in prison. So this is the amount of delay in giving justice in the Indian judicial system, and this highlights a very grim situation. So in this background, it is a very important issue for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view in the topic Constitution, Polity and Governance, where we should be aware of the reasons for the backlog and delay in the justice system of India. In this article, we will try and understand the status of judicial backlog, reasons for judicial pendency, impact of judicial pendency, and steps that should be taken to reduce the pendency. And all the points that we discuss here will completely cover this particular topic related to the issue of delay and pendency in the Indian judicial system. And you can write all these points that we mention here in any question related to delay in the justice system of India. So first, let us look at the status of judicial backlog in the Indian judicial system. Now, looking at the status of judicial backlog, according to the National Judicial Data Grid, in 2018, there were around 2.93 crore cases that were pending in the subordinate courts. 49 lakh cases are pending in high courts, and 57,987 cases are pending in Supreme Court respectively. So this shows that huge number of cases are pending across India. In Supreme Court, more than 30% of the pending cases are more than 5 years old, while in Allahabad High Court, 15% of the appeals have been pending since 1980s itself. A Law Commission report of 2009 had quoted that it would require 464 years to clear the arrears with the present strength of judges. So look at these numbers, and they highlight a very grim situation as far as the judicial system of India is concerned, and the kind of backlog that we witness in Indian judicial system. Then this brings us to the next question as to what are the reasons for such high judicial pendency in India. First and foremost reason that has been highlighted is the shortage of judges in India. And around 5,580, or about 25% of the posts are lying empty at the subordinate courts level. Further, the judges to population ratio is also poor in India, and India has only 20 judges per million population. Earlier, Law Commission had recommended that there should be a judges to population ratio of about 50 judges per million. Second reason for judicial pendency is frequent adjournments, and the laid down procedure of allowing a maximum of 3 adjournments per case is not followed in over 50% of the matters that are being heard by the courts, and this leads to rising pendency of the cases. That is, courts itself are not taking into consideration the time limit that has been set out in the procedure for allowing a maximum of 3 adjournments per case. Then there is low budgetary allocation, which leads to poor infrastructure of the judicial system. India spends about only 0.09% of its GDP to maintain the judicial infrastructure. And the infrastructure of the lower courts of the country is miserably grim, due to which they fail to deliver quality judgments. A 2016 report published by Supreme Court showed that existing infrastructure could accommodate only 15,540 judicial officers against the All India sanctioned strength of 21,000 judicial officers. So this shows that the allocation of GDP is also poor regarding the judicial infrastructure in India. Another reason for increasing pendency is that the burden of government cases in the judiciary itself is very high, and the central and the state governments are responsible for over 46% of the pending cases in the Indian courts. That is, the central and the state government themselves are the leading litigants in the Indian courts. Then the issue of special leave petition case in Supreme Court currently comprises about 40% of the court's pendency, and these eventually leads to reduced time for cases related to constitutional issues. Then there is issue of judges' vacation. Supreme Court works on an average for only 188 days a year, while the rules of Supreme Court specify minimum of 225 days of work. That is, even the highest court of India is not working efficiently. Then there is lack of court management systems, and courts have created dedicated posts for court managers to help improve court operations, optimize case movement and judicial time. However, only few courts have filled up such posts so far. Then there is inefficient investigation, and police are quite often handicapped in undertaking effective investigation because of lack of modern and scientific tools to collect the evidences. And then there has been increasing literacy rates in India, and because of this, people are becoming aware of their rights and the obligation of the state towards them. And accordingly, this population section approaches the court more frequently in case of any violation of their rights. Accordingly, India needs to improve its judicial capacity to entertain such kinds of litigations. Now, what is the impact of such kind of judicial pendency in India? So it is said that justice delayed is justice denied, and timely disposal of cases is essential to maintain rule of law and provide access to the justice. Speedy trial is a part of right to life and liberty, which is guaranteed under the Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and that is why justice should not be delayed. Second is that judicial pendency erodes social infrastructure. That is, a weak judiciary has a negative effect on social development, and it leads to lower per capita income, higher poverty rates, poor public infrastructure and higher crime rates, which is detrimental to the overall development of the country. Then there is issue of overcrowding of the prisons, and already the prison infrastructure is very deficient in India. And the overcrowding of prisons also results in violation of the human rights of the prisoners. Further, such kind of pendency affects economy of the country, as it was estimated that judicial delays cost India around 1.5% of its GDP. And according to the Economic Survey of 2017 and 18, pendency hampers dispute resolution, contract enforcement, it discourages investments, it stalls projects, and hampers tax collection and escalates legal costs. And this leads to increasing cost of doing business and is also detrimental to the ease of doing business, which India is increasingly trying to achieve. Now, what are the steps that are required to reduce pendency in India? First and foremost is the improvement in infrastructure for quality justice. And accordingly, a parliamentary standing committee has said that the state should provide suitable land for construction of court buildings, etc., and it should undertake vertical construction in the light of shortage of land. Timeline should be set out for computerization of all the courts, and necessary steps should be taken towards setting up of e-courts in India. Then also the courts or the system should address the issue of vacancies in the courts. And Supreme Court and High Court should appoint efficient and experienced judges as ad hoc judges in accordance with the Constitution of India to deal with the matter of pendency. Then proposal has also been forwarded for all India judicial services, which would benefit the subordinate judiciary by increasing the quality of judges and will also help in reducing dependency. Also, it has been recommended that there should be increase in the number of working days of the court. And average annual working days for subordinate courts is 244, 190 for Supreme Court and 232 for High Court. An increase in number of working days could improve productivity significantly. Then it has also been recommended that there is a need for definite time frame to dispose the cases by setting up annual targets and action plans for the subordinate judiciary and the high courts. And the judicial officers could be issued a strict code of conduct to ensure that the duties are adequately performed by the officials. Further, there is a need for better court management system and reliable data collection. For this, categorization of the cases on the basis of urgency and priority along with bunching of the cases should be done. Economic Survey of 2018 and 19 has suggested formation of Indian courts and tribunal services to provide administrative support functions needed by the judiciary and identify the process inefficiencies and advise the judiciary on legal reforms. There is also a need for use of information technology solutions, and there should be use of technology for tackling and monitoring cases and also in providing relevant information to make the justice litigant friendly. Further, there is a need for improving the alternate dispute resolution, and in this regard, it has been said that the Legal Services Authority should undertake pre-litigation mediation so that the inflow of cases into courts can be regulated. That is, even before the case is filed in the courts, there should be a provision of mediation so that the cases are finalized even before they enter the courts. Then the Lok Adalat should be organized regularly for settling civil and family matters. Further, Gram Nyayalayas can play an effective role in managing small claim disputes from rural areas. And finally, it has been recommended that the village legal care and support center can also be established by high courts to work at grassroots level to make the state litigation friendly. So these are some of the issues related to the pendency in the Indian judicial system and also the delay in the justice. So these are some of the reasons, impacts, and these are some of the suggestions. And all the points that we have discussed here were pretty simple and straightforward, and they should be learned and can be used in writing answers related to delay in the justice system of India. With this, we conclude today's discussion, and this is the question for the day.